Hey everybody, what's happening? It's time to talk about Naruto for a little bit. Now this is a spontaneous video, but I promise it is well thought out. I'm going to have, if my editing's diligent, I should have pretty much all the panels uh, with what I'm saying up. And so everything else that I don't is information that's straight off the data book. I don't feel like hunting down every piece of information, but I know it's there. And it's cited on the Naruto wiki. So, and I do trust that site because it does source the data book very religiously, as well as source the manga and the anime when necessary. So, uh, you can always look up that information on naruto.wikia.com if you have any additional questions or research to do. So basically, as you can probably tell by the title, the point of this video is to talk about the Naruto timeline. Now, the timeline seems a little screwed up, but I mean, I'm gonna dissect it as best as possible here and see if we can come up with a logical conclusion, excuse me, that um, does not contradict the series, and we'll see if there might be some flaws in this in Kishimoto's timeline here because there might be some contradictions involved here. And while I think it might not be a contradiction, so to speak, it is a problem that needs to be addressed. Unfortunately, since the series is over for all intents and purposes, he'll probably not answer this question unless somebody asks him, like specifically. So, without being vague any further, let's go into the detail. Now, the part of the timeline that I'm sort of confused about and I'm sort of going to talk about is the time where the Second Ninja War ended. Excuse me. Oh my gosh. Second Ninja War ended and the third began. And as well as who did Jiraiya train first? Nagato or Minato? Um, Logically, you would say Nagato, and that does seem to be the case, but it's really, really close together, and I'll tell you why. Let's start first by analyzing their ages. Uh, so Nagato, when he died in the Pain Arc, was 35 years old. Now, that's approximately 16 years um, after Minato's death. Minato died when he was 24, and both of these are data book informations. Now, again, 16 years, which would have made Minato 40 if he was still living at the time of Nagato's death, which makes Minato roughly 5 years older than Nagato. So now that we're straight on that, um, we can talk a little bit about some of the events that have happened. So the Third Great Ninja War ended, well, ended after 10 years, so it lasted about 10 years uh, and ended a year before Minato's death, aka Naruto's birth. Uh, and so we can surmise that because Kakashi was 13 when he became a Jonin, which is when the end of the war was. The whole battle at the Tenchi Bridge was at the very, very tail end of that war. And so Kakashi was 13, he just became a Jonin, and he's 28 in the beginning of part 1, which is 14 years, of course, and Naruto was about 13 by the end of part 1. So we can surmise that, from that information, we can deduce that the Third Great Ninja War ended about a year before Naruto's birth and Minato's death. So, with that in mind, 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I should say, from Minato's death, he was about 13, which means the Third Great Ninja War and began when he was about 13 years old. And again, this is also coming from data book information. He graduated from the academy when he was 10. So, in order for him to have had Jiraiya as I guess as a teacher while he was a Genin, it must have come somewhere between the age of 10 and somewhere in the Great Ninja War ending. before he became a Jonin, because uh, Minato is not a Jonin, or he was not Hokage by the end of the war. He was a Jonin. He became Hokage after the war had ended, and we know that Orochimaru still had not left the village yet. But that's irrelevant to this discussion. So, with that in mind, we have to say, well, Jiraiya could have taught Minato at age 10 when he graduated from the academy, like they should have. However, I don't know that that's the case, and let me explain why. Well, let's go back. Let's go to Nagato now. Now, Nagato, again, as I've established, is 5 years younger than Minato. So when he was 10, when Minato was 10, Nagato was 5, meaning that, and that was during the Second World War. How do we know this? Because it was stated that, you know, that Jiraiya had basically taken in the orphans during the Second World War. Uh, so with that being said, Nagato could not have been under 5. I mean, it's plausible that maybe when he first used the Rinnegan in his parents' house that maybe he was 4, but I highly doubt it. And honestly, for Nagato, Yahiko, and Conan to be as cognizant as they were, to be able to steal food, etc., I don't. I mean, this is the only part that's speculation, and that's I don't believe that they were anything under 5, personally, when Jiraiya found them, um, because especially by the end of the 3 years, they looked at least like 10. So, I mean, I would say at the most, or at the very least, Nagato was 5, and Conan was 5, and Yahiko was about 5 when Jiraiya found them and decided to take them in for 3 years, which we know it's 3 years because it's stated that it's 3 years. And like I said, you should see the panel in on the screen. So with that being said, let's think about it this way. We know that the Second War was still going on, or was at its very tail end by the time Jiraiya had, taken them in. Because we know that, again, we do know that because one, they were traveling from being injured and had been fighting, and two, there was a rock ninja still in Omega Kure that attacked Yahiko, and he had been still in his garb for war, and that's when Nagato killed him to protect Yahiko. So in that 3 years span, it is assumed that the Second Great Ninja War ended. However, if we think about what that means, if Nagato was 5, which again is the least age that I personally believe he could have been when he was taken in by Jiraiya. If Nagato was 5, that means that Minato was 10, and the Great Ninja War Third Great Ninja War began when he was 13. And so if 3 years passed between 5 and 8, well, guess what? By the time Jiraiya leaves Nagato and the orphans, the Third Great Ninja War starts. So ultimately, there was a very very small gap between the Second and Third War, uh, because I mean with the most span of 3 years, and then so are we then to assume that Jiraiya did not train Minato until he came back to the village when Minato was 13? Because he had already been a Genin by 10, assumedly because he was a genius ninja and he graduated at 10. Assumedly, he became a Genin right away, even if it wasn't by Jiraiya's hand. Um, so, what happened there? I don't know. Because is it possible that Minato was a Genin before he even had, he had for 3 full years a Genin until he actually had a proper master and being Jiraiya? Um, who knows? Because when you think about it, they were in peacetime. So during those 3 years, they're sort of in peacetime. depending on what month Minato graduated from the academy, you can surmise that, well, he could have graduated right when the war ended, because it's pretty much, I mean, it's assumed that it ended that year because it seemed like it was at the tail end, but the war could have continued on through that year. We don't even know. We're not given an exact date of when the second war ended. So it could have, that could have been still going. But I'm going to guess that's not the case, because Minato, graduated, and it seemed like he was a genin under somebody, or Jiraiya, if Kishimoto's timeline is incorrect, and basically Minato is supposed to be a genin under Jiraiya straight out of the academy, which is what you're supposed to do. Um, or perhaps he was a genin under somebody else. I mean, there's something obviously wrong here, and until it's cleared up, it seems like an inconsistency, or it's just an unexplained blank period of time. These 3 years for Minato, what was going on that um, could possibly, have been in the way of Jiraiya teaching him, or whatever. Um, like, was he still a Genin for 3 years before Jiraiya started teaching him, and he just paired with two other randoms? I don't know. But if we think about it that way, it does sort of make some sense, but we're not really told. We're not really told what happened, and we know at some point he saved Kushina while he was already a Genin, because he had his headband when he saved Kushina. Um, so we do know that he was a Genin by then, when he saved Kushina, but we don't know if Jiraiya was his master yet, because he seemed not quite 13 yet. He still seemed like he was like 10 or 11 or whatever, at least just by eye. Again, speculation. Uh, but if Nagato was any older than 5, well, then we have a serious problem here, because if he was 6, that means that Minato had already been 11 by the time he took him in. And, you know, and then, it's like, if you think about it that way, then only 2 years passed and the Third Great Ninja War began, and Jiraiya was not present at that time, for a whole year while the Third Great Ninja War was going on. So, and if Nagato was 7 when he trained him, well then 2 full years. And if Nagato was 8, and that's not possible. It's not possible that Nagato was 8, because the Third Great Ninja War began that year. Um, and so Nagato had to be 7, 6, or 5. And again, speculation, but I don't think he was any younger than 5. So there's like this 3-year gap almost where he could have taught Nagato, but it's most likely, in my opinion, most likely that he taught him at 5, because um, again, Jiraiya would have been present for the whole Third Great Ninja War, because they would have sent word for him. They would have absolutely sent word for him if the Third Ninja War had started, and he would have been like, "Oh crap!" So, and the reason why I don't think that it was 8 is because, again, just aside from that, like, I don't, I firmly believe that the Second War did not end the same year that the Third War began. Um, it it just doesn't seem possible to me, because they would have just considered it the Second War that would have lasted like 20 some years or whatever. But yeah, so if we put it that way, like, if Nagato was 6, then um, it was possible that Jiraiya could have trained Minato for a whole year, during the Second Ninja War, and perhaps it ended around that time. But then again, if Jiraiya's in wartime, how could he have trained Minato? It doesn't. That also doesn't add up. So in that regard, it seems like it's more likely that he trained Nagato before he trained Minato. So again, in that respect, Minato had to have been at least 13 by the time Jiraiya had approached him and started training him. It had to be. Uh, and in that case, you know, there's also wartime in there too. So did Jiraiya just not participate in that wartime just to teach Minato? Again, is Jiraiya just like a piece of shit or something? I don't know. But I mean, he did abandon his god kid, but that's besides the point. So like, there's a lot of confusion there, in my opinion, and I think it's not just easily cleared up by theory, because I've given theory, but it still doesn't make complete sense, because by the time Minato was 13, there's already wartime again. There's already the Third Great Ninja War starting, because again, as I said, he was 24 when he died. The Third War ended 10 years, or lasted 10 years, and there was a year gap between the end of the war and Naruto's birth. So, with that in mind, there's a lot of confusion, and there's not a giant window for opportunity there. And and for the record, just fun fact, doesn't mean anything. That Jiraiya would have been about um, 27 when he would have trained, or something like that. 20, yeah, about 27 by the time he trained Minato, and it would have been like 24 by the time he trained Nagato. So, and that's just interesting tidbit. And now another piece of information is that Nagato, or not Nagato, Yahiko died when he was 15. Also data book information. He was 15, so considering if he's the same age as Nagato, that means it would have been about a 7, like that means that it would have been 7 years into the Third War when he died, um, which is just another interesting tidbit. So yeah, and that does sort of make sense. So there's a lot going on here, and I'll probably leave you guys with that, because I want to hear what you guys think about this. But honestly, I think the timeline seems a bit fucked. But you know, you never know, because it's like Nagato's younger than Minato, and yet was trained first. It just doesn't seem like 5 years younger, which is like, and yet was trained first, whereas Minato was what, trained when he was 13. I mean, it does sort of ring true to what Naruto went through, but again, Naruto didn't graduate till he was 12, on his way to 13, and Minato graduated when he was 10. So I don't know. There's obviously something going on there that Kishimoto really needs to clear up if asked, but he's not going to, again, unless he's asked by somebody. So if you see Kishimoto on the street, just ask him. Say, look, Strider Zero had this, talked about this shit, and just point him to my video if he can understand English and shit. I don't know. I'm just kidding, but regardless, tell me what you guys think. It's just a little bit of food for thought for the Naruto timeline discussion. So thank you guys for listening, and check out our other videos, and we'll see you guys there.